Welcome to Leading for Life Stories, Season 3. I'm Bob Judson. I'm the host for this podcast, and I'm absolutely delighted to have you here joining me. Regardless of whether you're a seasoned listener who's been with me since the beginning, or whether you've just dropped in for the occasional episode, I really hope you enjoyed the mix of content that I provide, the personal stories, the thematic episodes, and the guests that I have on the show. And I hope you find it all interesting and at least some of it useful. And without further ado, let's go. Hi, everybody. I thought it was time I did a final chapter to my Commanding Officer RAF Coningsby story and wrap up some of the things I've been talking about in the previous 7 parts of this that I've done. It was such a multifaceted opportunity and a really incredible role that's why I've ended up with quite a few separate podcasts. And I've talked about the leadership challenge. I've talked about building the Typhoon Force. I've talked about flying the Spitfires and Hurricanes of the Battle of Britain Memorial Flight. I've talked about flying the Typhoon and what that involved. And then a couple of special things around the Queen's birthday fly past and actually flying and helping work up the Typhoon display and some of the supervisory challenges around that. There are some things I haven't talked about that I thought I could probably just cover off in this final episode as a kind of wrapper to everything that I've said so far. And that one of those is about Jaguar flying and why I ended up doing some of that again. Also, the quick reaction alert role that we had throughout my time on the base that was actually still held by the Tornado F3. A few memorable moments, perhaps, and then a little bit about the legacy word and where we actually left it and what that all looked like. And so that's the plan for this episode. And I hope it provides a suitable kind of capstone to what was an amazing chapter in my RAF career, and really one that would be, I'll struggle to equal in many ways. I think everyone's pinnacle role in command terms is to command a station, and to command any station is a privilege. To command a station like RAF Coningsby at the stage it was at, with a brand new capability and everything that was going on, to be flying 5 types of airplanes in the final chapter of my flying career, was just extraordinary. I mean, I couldn't have possibly dreamt that was going to be what happened. And so it was extraordinary to be in that place. And I look back on it with nothing but the fondest of memories. I won't regurgitate everything I've said in the previous episodes, because you can listen to those at your leisure, but they will give you a really good flavor around the whole Typhoon side of life. But I think it's worth a mention about the Jaguar, because I'd spent a lot of time flying the Jaguar. I had more than 2,500 flying hours out of 3,500 total on the Jaguar. And I'd done a lot of operational flying. I'd been a junior pilot right through to being a squadron commander on the aeroplane. And so it has a very, very special place in my heart. And I was consequently very sad when RAF Coltishall, which was the last base that the Jaguar was at, closed down during the time I was at Coningsby. But at the same time, it was a bit kind of bittersweet, because in that happening, 6th Squadron, which was, of course, the squadron I had commanded, kept flying the Jaguar and moved to RAF Coningsby as the final chapter in the Jaguar's life, before it then itself had a brief hiatus and now is a Typhoon squadron based at RAF Lossiemouth, having previously been based at RAF Lucas when it first reformed as a Typhoon squadron. And so the Jaguar coming to Coningsby during my time was a really special thing for me. I was very conscious that I wanted that to go well. I was conscious it was the very last chapter for the aeroplane. Wing Commander John Sullivan was the commanding officer. He'd worked for me as my executive officer, so my deputy commander when I was the squadron commander. So a man I know extremely well and have a huge amount of time for. And obviously a team of pilots and engineers who were also pretty familiar to me in large part. Not I didn't know all of them, but I knew a lot of them. It was particularly memorable for me that when I had moved from RAF Bruggen to RAF Larbrook, the station commander that ended up commanding RAF Larbrook for the overwhelming majority of my time there, I've had almost my entire tour there, was a man who had previously flown the Jaguar. He had over 1,000 hours on the Jaguar. had then switched over to the Tornado, was a Tornado Squadron Commander, and then was moved from Tornado Squadron Command into command of RAF Larbrook as the station commander as a result of something that happened that I won't dwell on now with his nominated predecessor. And during the time I was at Larbrook on 2 Squadron, I remember vividly feeling that the station commander, although he had a lot of Jaguar experience, paid very little attention to us at all. He flew with us on a tiny handful of occasions during his entire tour. And I just kind of stuck with me that this was perhaps one of those things where if I ever was in a similar situation, I would handle it differently. And of course, this was a case where I really did feel I had a chance to do that. I had a lone Jaguar unit in the midst of what was a very, very busy Typhoon build-up with a conversion unit, an operational evaluation unit, and 2, by that stage, frontline squadrons under development, as well as everything else that was going on at the base. So it was a stretch, if you like, to get too involved in the Jaguar. But I was also very, very conscious that it wasn't going to be difficult. There was no conversion unit. At that stage, the conversion unit had folded up. It was basically the last chapter for the Jaguar, so they weren't putting any new pilots onto it. But John Sullivan and I had a conversation, and I said to him, look, it's really important I come and fly. We need to find a way to make this work. I want to show the guys on your squadron that I care, that I actually believe in what you're doing. And I was a bit of self-interest. I was keen to go and see how the aeroplane had evolved and just have an opportunity to get back into it. And so that's what we did. I didn't do a great deal of flying. I did a handful of hours, I suppose, in the time that they were there before I moved on. But I loved it. I absolutely loved getting back into the airplane. It really was like greeting an old friend, getting back into the cockpit and having an opportunity to effectively notice that not that much had changed. And my hands kind of moved and did all the right switches almost automatically. There was some changes to the airplane. It had the new engines that we'd put into it as part of the upgrade, so they're a little bit more powerful. Nothing on comparison to the Typhoon, mind you, but they were still a little bit more powerful. And quite a lot of software upgrades that made it even more capable in terms of what it was doing in its ground attack role. And I'd always loved flying it, and this was no exception. And I really do think that it made a bit of a difference to 6 Squadron. I'd like to think so anyway, that I was able as a former boss and obviously as a very experienced Jaguar pilot to come back and show them what I think the station commander's role is, which is to kind of be present, not get in the way, but at the same time be showing them that I cared, that I still had credibility and capability with the airplane, and I was willing to kind of get involved and see what they did. And that was just huge fun. And I didn't try and get combat ready or anything else. I just worked up and did a number of sorties with them on various different things. And I think that was so worthwhile as I look back on it now, and was a great, again, sort of closing chapter to the Jaguar element of my career as well, that I could actually close off with some sorties on that. So it was a wonderful thing to be able to do. It was quite amusing some of the time though, because I remember vividly flying in a Jaguar to land at Wharton, BAE Systems Wharton up near Preston, to go and pick up a brand new Typhoon. So I got out of a Jaguar and then got into a brand shiny new couple of hours on it aeroplane that I was then flying back to Coningsby. And there was a 2-seat Jaguar, obviously, I'd flown in with, and there's a guy I knew really, really well who had been flying with on that day. And he lined up with me to take off, and we were going back, and he was climbing out to 4,000 feet, and I was climbing out to 40,000 feet, which said it all about the difference of capability, really, in terms of the old and the new. And it was a great sign-off in some ways to really see the difference between the two. And I can also remember sitting in my Typhoon looking at the Jaguar next to me as we were about to get airborne separately, but going back to Coningsby, and just realizing how big the Typhoon was as an airplane compared to the Jaguar. Jaguar was a tiny little airplane, which was one of its advantages in many ways. And I was looking down on this little Jaguar and thinking, wow, how things have changed. And special memories. And I really loved that. The next thing I wanted to talk about on this episode was something that was on my base, but which I had relatively little to do with directly. And that was the quick reaction alert capability, which is something that some people are aware of because it makes the news occasionally. But we have air defense aircraft on quick reaction alert in the UK every day of every year, all of the time. and they're on very short notice to get airborne, and they really do so for a couple of different reasons. One is to investigate and ultimately defend UK airspace from foreign intrusion, whatever that may be and whatever form that may take. And also, increasingly since the events of 2001, to actually investigate and shadow and, if necessary, deal with rogue airliners. So airliners that have been potentially hijacked and are going to do something as extreme as happened when the Twin Towers were knocked down in New York. That mercifully is not something that's been repeated, but obviously the capability was demonstrated, and therefore we needed to have a defense against it. So we have aircraft on alert all of the time, literally all year round. And it is actually really, really impressive to go and see what they do. Because in sharp contrast to the QRA that I had done myself as a young pilot and Bruggen all those years earlier when I was on nuclear QRA, and we had the capability, we had everything on state, we were ready to go flying, but we never flew. I mean, if we'd flown, then obviously that was going to be a really, really bad thing, because it generally meant that we're in a kind of Armageddon scenario. And so seeing the air defense QRA was very different, because they do fly a lot. They get airborne very, very regularly to go and intercept and shadow and look after, in some instances, aircraft that have lost radios or something strange has happened, or indeed to go and intercept quite often Russian aircraft that come around the North Cape, come down through the North Sea, and will just come and probe and prod at UK airspace and obviously all the other international airspace along the way, just to basically see what we do. And we'll always get airborne. We'll always meet them. It's a game that's been going on for absolutely decades, since the end of the Second World War, for sure. This has been something that's been happening. And we honor that threat. We get airborne and go and pursue them. And of course, the guys on QRA have to deal with the fact that they're in there for a period of time. They have to be ready to get airborne at very short notice all the time. And so they can never really relax. And they never quite know what they're going to be doing. They could be investigating something that's at very high level, a very long way away. They could be investigating something that's at much lower level, that is very close, and doing something that prompts a response. They're one of the very few elements of the RAF that can ever go supersonic. In fact, pretty much the only element of the RAF that can ever go supersonic over land, if they have to. If they need to pursue an intercept and time is critical, they'll get authorization to go supersonic over land. And that's a really big factor, in terms of the noise and disruption that it can create. So that's why it's such a limited capability. But they just have to be ready for anything. And obviously that is an interesting kind of dynamic. And it was fascinating to go and visit the Tornado F3 QRA that was still on state at Coningsby as Southern QRA when I was in command of Coningsby. Nowadays, it's done out of Coningsby and also Lossiemouth with Typhoons rather than F3s. And we have a similar capability down in the Falkland Islands. We've deployed a similar capability further east in response to Russian aggression in Ukraine, but also to reassure and work with the Baltic states. And the Typhoon QRA is obviously slightly different, but not that much different to what was happening with the Tornado F3, where fully armed airplanes, fully air defense armed, on state, ready to go at the drop of a hat. And obviously, if you launch it, then you have backup airplanes that you bring up onto state to then be ready to follow up with further aircraft if you need to. There's tanker support available. There's all of the normal capability in terms of fighter control, etc., that would actually work to facilitate intercepts for real if needed. And again, having that on the base and having that kind of genuine operational thread that we were building the Typhoon force towards was just it was a really interesting and great thing to have. So I loved the fact that was there, even if it was something that was somewhat peripheral to what we were doing in terms of the build up of the Typhoon and everything else that was going on. So really quite different. That kind of takes me to the summary piece of all that I've been saying about Coningsby. And I mean, in memorable moments terms, I suppose it's easy to dwell on some of the firsts that we had, the things that personally were very special in terms of activities that I did, particularly on the flying side, picking up 2 new airplanes from the factory, leading the Queen's birthday fly past, flying the first Diamond 9 ever for any of the Eurofighter nations, building up that capability generally in terms of Typhoon and what we were doing, flying the Spitfires and Hurricanes of the BBMF. These are unique memories that were deeply personal, extraordinarily vivid. Even now, 20 years later, I can recall so many of the individual elements of the things that we did with such immense pride. But the thing without a doubt that shines through as the most memorable element of it was having such an incredible team of people working for me during the time that I was in command. We were at a pivotal time for the RAF in terms of building up that capability, and we needed to have very good, very dedicated, very capable people across the board who were able to really leverage that and ensure that we moved stuff forward safely, sensibly, but effectively and quickly. And we had that on steroids. We really did have some phenomenally good people, and right through the airman cadre and the officer cadre, some people that I think were just quite extraordinary. A lot of them had been pretty much handpicked to go into the roles. Some of them had been around the Typhoon for a long time. Some of the ones doing other things on the base had just been, at the top of their game, whether they were running base support and looking after everything that went on the administration side, whether they were looking after the Battle Britain Memorial Flight, these things that were peripheral to the Typhoon, but still very, very important to the base as a whole. But that Typhoon capability and the need to have absolutely top quality pilots, engineers, and all the wider support crew that were able to work and deliver that capability. The operations wing side, where we were looking after the airfield build and the preparedness to operate Typhoon fully from the base and in a really kind of capable way. These were individuals who it was just a subject of immense pride for me. I really, I look back on that and I think, wow, was I lucky to have worked with such an extraordinary cast of people for really quite a long period of time. And that was just immensely special. And I think most people will turn around and say when they leave the military that actually the thing you miss are the people. And I'm exactly the same. I think I loved a lot of what I did in the Air Force, and I was incredibly lucky across the whole time I was in the Air Force. But the people were definitely the most special element of that. And never was that sort of better expressed than at Coningsby itself, where we just had such a good crowd. And I think the point as well, I always try and pull out some leadership points here on some of these podcasts. So I think you've got to deal with the hand of cards you've got, obviously, in terms of the people. You won't always have choice. You won't always have flexibility of the people you actually have that work for you. And you have to invest time and effort to get to know them individually where it's possible to do that. And certainly the senior team, you need to know them well and individually. And you need to look at what are their strengths, what are their, I don't want to use the word weaknesses really, but what are the areas that possibly they need to be developed in a bit more, and where do you have gaps? Where do you have things you need to do slightly differently? Where do you need to focus to make sure you're not carrying risk that you don't want to be carrying, and those sorts of things? And that, with any team, that's a really, really important feature. And if you're incredibly lucky and you have a really great team that's really strong and very diverse and holds cover across all of those gaps, and you really don't have much risk, then that's an incredibly fortunate place to be. But you still have to have your eye on the ball. You still have to have your eye firmly on the ball to make sure that you do not suddenly find something catches you out that you hadn't thought about. So working through that with your team, looking at the team themselves, being aware of succession planning across the whole team as people move in and out of it, making sure that you create the space for new people to come into the team when you actually need them in there. If you've got a really tight-knit group, then you have to turn around and actively manage opening up that group to let people in so they actually feel they can spread their wings a little bit and they can fly within the structure you've actually got. And that doesn't happen by accident. That is very much a leadership role to turn around and manage that within the bounds of the options you have available. Sometimes you'll have more flexibility about hiring and firing, etc. Other times you won't have any flexibility about that, and you just have to deal with it. And I hope that in most instances for you, you're as lucky as I was with these sorts of situations where, by and large, I had phenomenally good people. Of course, you have some wrinkles. Of course, you have some people that let you down. You have things that go wrong. You have unexpected events. that test you and challenge you on the people front, particularly. That's just typical of any organization. And it's really important just to manage that and go on to look at the majority of the people who are doing an outstanding job and saying thank you to them, recognizing them for what they do, praising them, publicly acknowledging what they do, privately acknowledging it to them as well. Know the kind of people you've got. Do they like being publicly recognized? Do they like being called out? Do they not like that? Just have a thought about all of that kind of stuff, because with a bit of luck, in the sort of situation that I was in any kind of senior team leadership role, you will find that actually you reap the rewards of having an incredible team of people, because it does make such a big difference if you do. The final thing that I wanted to talk about on this episode is that dreaded legacy thing. Everyone talks about, should we talk about legacy? Is it a bit self-indulgent to be talking about what legacy you leave? But the reality is you all leave traces in every job. Everybody leaves traces behind of what you do. And I think the basic premise that people adopt, and it's certainly not my expression, but it's been used many, many times, that you want to leave it better than you found it. And that's much easier if you come across an organization that's been poorly run for some reason, that you actually can easily pick it up and build up a better capability. It's a real challenge when you're coming across an organization that's been well run and has done a lot in its immediate past that is taking it in the right direction. And that's exactly what I had. I inherited a great station from a great station commander and a whole series of great predecessors before him. And that meant that we were on a different tack because we had different things going on and different capabilities, and we're at a different stage of particularly the Typhoon's development. But we needed to really look at, right, what's the focus? What's realistic here to get us to a place where by the time I hand over the station, and I handed over in November 2006 to Group Captain at the time, Stuart Ather, a great friend of mine, went on ultimately to be a 3-star Air Marshal in the RAF and with a tremendously successful career. And I wanted to make sure we were handing over to Stu a really good going concern that was setting him on the path that he could then meet his goals. And his goals were to take the airplane through its operational capability hurdles. So to get it actively on quick reaction alert, to get it fully declared in the air defense role, to then get it fully declared in the ground attack role. Those were big, big onward jumps from where we'd got to, but we'd carried out a lot of the work that took it on that path. And particularly for the Typhoon element of the base, I think we can be rightly proud of what was achieved in the 2 years from 2004 to 2006, when we took it from nothing, just an infrastructure program that had put the basics in place to be ready for the airplane, to actually having one squadron pretty much fully up to strength, another squadron getting firmly on the path to being fully up to strength, an OCU conversion unit that was working really, really effectively, and an operational capability in a sort of readiness state with the airplane that was absolutely moving in the right direction. So we were, I think, really justified in feeling that we had a good result here. And that was absolutely where we wanted to be with it. And we all felt, I think, that there were some great achievements. My last day was a really sad one, of course. You walk away from a job like this thinking, oh my goodness, what next? And I think any command job, you always kind of have to then go, right, where is the next prospect? And at the end of commanding a station, that's a tough thing, because you kind of look at what is coming next. There are no probably really operational command jobs that are in view, or so I thought at the time. So this was the end of I suppose my flying career, and also potentially at that stage the last sort of really chunky command role I was going to have. And so it was sad. It was really sad. But at the same time, it was, again, a bit bittersweet, because the bitter bit was leaving and leaving it all behind. But at the same time, you were there for 2 years. You've given it your all for 2 years. You've done everything you can do. And then you're handing it over in the best possible way with a smile on your face and walking out the door. And it's King is dead, long live the King. And by the time I got back from my tour around the base in a motorbike sidecar, with lots of people out there waving me off, which was a wonderful thing, and I'll never, ever forget it. And I've got some phenomenal photographs that go with that. Then by the time I got back to the station headquarters, my name was off the door and Stu Ather's name was on the door. And that's the way it works. And then you drive off the base and you're done. You're a former station commander, and that's the end of your time. But it was amazing time. What a time it was. I mean, just when I look back now, so many memories and so much that I still will smile about every time I think about it today. And that was incredibly special. I was heading off at the end of my time at Coningsby to go to a couple of courses. I was going to the Higher Command Staff course, which still is really one of the pinnacle staff courses that we have, one of the most important steps to going onwards and upwards to the top of the military, joint course, Army, Navy, Air Force course with some other players on it as well. And I'll talk about that on a different chapter, along with the Royal College of Defence Studies that I was heading to after I'd been at the Higher Command and Staff course. And I wasn't going to do the whole course. I was going to drop in a term late because the HCSC was at the front end of it. But that was another incredible experience. So the whole of 2007 was occupied with going back into the training world and just shifting into a different space. It also was a great personal chapter because straight after I'd finished at Coningsby, one of the happiest days of my life was getting married to my wonderful wife, and we went out to St. Lucia in December 2006 and did that marriage thing, and that was just very, very special. And again, something to take away the sadness of finishing the base. If you're going to have anything that's going to do that, then clearly getting married to the lady that I'm still with today, who I love dearly, was a very, very special time. That's it for this week. I didn't want to overdo this. I just want to close out the Coningsby chapter, move on to some other stuff next. Some other great guests coming up before terribly long as well. And I really hope you've enjoyed this, and I'll speak to you again very soon. Bye for now. I really hope you've enjoyed this chapter of my discussions around RAF Coningsby, but also all the ones that have gone before it and all the other personal stories, as well as some of the thematic episodes and obviously my guest interviews. If you do, then as I've said on many of these episodes before, please do me the favor of sharing it widely, share it on social media, give me a bit of a boost by liking the podcast, reviewing the podcast, and just getting more of your friends to actually listen to it. If you really find the content that I provide valuable, and I hope that in some parts at least that it is, then financially supporting me would make a tremendous difference. And for the price of a couple of cups of coffee a month from any of your favorite high street outlets, then you can make a very, very big difference to me by going to www.patreon.com/leading4life and joining as either a supporter, a champion, or a patron of the show. You can do exactly the same thing by clicking the support the show link that you'll find in the show notes for this episode on your podcast platform. Please do think about doing that if you would. It would make a huge difference to me, and I would greatly appreciate it. But either way, I'm just extremely grateful for you listening. Thanks very much indeed. See you soon. Bye.